Okay, good morning. So where we are is we have just discussed the Gemara yesterday on Chaf Aleph and Aleph. I'm going to do today Chaf Aleph and Beis. But we are at the wide lines, the beginning of the wide lines on Chaf Aleph and Aleph. And what we would like to do is just to remind the last Gemara what we had seen. So we had just seen that the Gemara in the two dots before that, in the narrow lines, the Gemara had said a three-way machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda, who said if somebody had a suffix, if it was Kriyat Shema or not, and this is Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, but somebody who had a suffix, if he had said Shema or not, that he doesn't have to go back. Why? Because Shmuel holds that Kriyat Shema is D'Rabbanan. What do you mean Shmuel holds that Kriyat Shema is D'Rabbanan? It says of Shapach Kamach, as Rabbi Yosef pointed out, as the Abai explains, that's by Divrei Torah. As the Rabbeinu Yener notes in later on in the Daf Arif, Yud Gimel Amud Beis, as he pointed out, that essentially what we are saying, according to the way Shmuel is learning, is that the idea of saying learning in the morning and in the evening, that of course is the Araisa, but having to say the Parshas of Shema, those Parshas are D'Rabbanan. So if somebody has a suffix, if they said Shema or not, so such a person doesn't have to return. And Masuyatz was considered to be a Daraisa because that is Yitzias Mitzrayim. Of course, you're able to be Yitzias Mitzrayim if you say Shema. And how could it be a situation where somebody forgot one and not the other? We have to leave that, as we said yesterday, to the side. This is the whole point of Minayana, etc. Then we had a second opinion. That was the opinion of Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer said that if somebody has said Shema or not, that person has to go back and say Kriyat Shema. Why? Because according to Rabbi Lezer was learning, Kriyat Shema is Daraisa. So if Kriyat Shema is Daraisa, then of course the person has to go back. It's a suffix Daraisa, so you have to go back and say it. And Rabbi Lezer added an additional point. Rabbi Lezer said, if you're suffix, if you're hispalel or not, if you have a suffix, if you remember to daven Shemana Esrei or not, so then according to Rabbi Lezer, the halacha was that you do not have to go back. If somebody's a suffix, if they daven or not, you don't have to go back. And Rabbi Yechanan said, "Levai sheispal kol hayom kulay." Halavai, that a person should be able to daven all day. What did that mean? So that was understood to mean that Rabbi Yechanan is disagreeing with Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer is the student of Rabbi Yechanan, and nevertheless, he has a different opinion. Interestingly, that he's brought first, but he's being brought first here in this specific situation because of the fact that he's responding to Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. But put that on the side. Rabbi Yechanan's opinion is that halavai, a person should daven all day long. That is to say, that if a person is a suffix, if they davened or not, such a person should daven again. Such is the understanding. And in fact, if you look at Rashi quotes on the Bahag, that we're passing like Rabbi Yechanan when it comes to a situation of suffix. If somebody's not sure if they daven or not, we don't pass in that you don't go back. You do go back. Why? Because halavai, a person should be able to daven all day. Which is very interesting. There's a few questions on Rabbi Yechanan. That Rabbi Yechanan is saying halavai, a person should be able to daven all day long. We're going to have later on in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to tell us on Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph. The Gemara is going to say over there that we learn out from a pasuk in Daniel that Zimnan Talisa, that a person has 3 times a day to daven. The Gemara says, "Yochel yispal adam kol hayom kulay." You think a person should daven all day long? No, kvar mefurish day Daniel, v'zimnan Talisa. You have 3 times to daven. So it's literally a pasuk in Chumash that a person is only supposed to daven 3 times a day. And the Gemara is saying lafuke from somebody who thinks that you should daven all day long. So what's Rabbi Yechanan coming about? More than that, the Gemara tells us in Shabbos. I mentioned this yesterday very briefly. The Shabbos Shet Aleph, the Gemara tells us there that according to Rabbi Yechanan, he and his friends, his ilk, Tairasa Nasan, they were literally studying Torah all day long. So such people who was Tairasa Nasan, so they were able to be learning all day and not be mafsik for Shemana Esrei, not be mafsik for Tefillah, but they were mafsik for Kriyat Shema. But us, said the Brachot, we're on a lowly level, so we're not really Tarasanim Nasan. So we are mafsik not just for Kriyat Shema, but also for Tefillah. What does it sound like from that memory of Rabbi Yechanan? Sounds like that memory of Rabbi Yechanan. The ideal is to be learning all day. So then you're mafsik for another mitzvah to say that right, so like Kriyat Shema. but you're not mafsik for tefillah. So what's Rabbi Yochanan over here saying halavai? So you spell kolayim kulay. Not true. Halavai, we should be able to be teras and nothing to learn all day. Third, the Gemara there also in Shabbos, the blot before on Yud Amud Aleph, the Gemara says that I think it was Rava saw of Hamnuna davening, and he was being marich b'tzlusei. He was davening a long time. The Gemara over there said that I think it was Rava says to Rav Nuna, you're being oiskin, you're manichin chaya olam v'oiskin v'chaya shah. You're putting aside your olam haba to daven for your good in this world. What's more important? You should be focused on what's going to go on for you in the future or here. So that is to say that it was pretty clear that somebody who's davening, Shemona Esrei is davening bakashas for himself, for his family, for the Jewish people. It's very nice. But it's all this worldly kind of things. Go focus on learning. All of which would seem to indicate that a question of Rabbi Yochanan. And more than that, we also have the Gemara later on tells us as well. The Gemara tells us later on Lamed Beis Lamed Beis. The Gemara tells us about the Chassidim Harishonim. They were showing Pesha Shoyes B'Yom B'Tfilah. They would daven 9 hours a day, 9 hours, an hour to prepare for the davening, an hour to daven, and an hour after finish to come down from their high. 3 hours for each tefillah. Can you imagine? 3 hours each tefillah, 9 hours a day they were learning, davening. I'm sorry. So the Gemara asks about them. So Teiros and Mishtameres, Malachta and Hechanasis, how did they manage to survive? How did the Torah survive? How did their work survive? So the Gemara says, okay, because they're Chassidim, they managed. They got a special bracha for the Parnasa, a special bracha to retain the Torah. So what do you see? Even the Chassidim Harishayin, nobody ever thought about dreaming all day. Dreaming of davening all day. So I can say Rabbi Yochanan says, Halavai she'yispal kol yom kulei. So I'll put this there, sort of these questions a bit on the side, but this is a bit of a further insight to understand these next Gemaras that are coming up. Says the Gemara, and this is where we left off yesterday. The two dots, the first of the wide lines on Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and now we're very clearly this is Shmuel. But again, as we pointed out from the Meseres Shas, the last two dots we said Amar Rav Yehuda, you also have to add in Shmuel. And all the Rishonim, when they talk about that sugya, they talk about it as Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So that's the reason the Meseres Shas added it. Okay, continues the Gemara. Somebody who's in the middle of davening Shemana Esrei, and he remembers, oops, I actually already davened Shemana Esrei. So Pesach, the halacha is he should stop. Even if he's in the middle of a bracha, he should just stop. And he says, Rav Nachman says, when we were by Rabbi Baravu, we asked him the following question. Hani b'nei Beirav, these students, the Torah, Mitgri Dechol b'Shabbos. They are middle of davening Shemana Esrei on Shabbos, and oops, they remember that in fact, you know what they're up to? They're the joke. The guy's in the middle of davening Shemana Esrei. He has no idea that it was Shabbos, so he goes like this, and he's like, "Oh yes, Shabbos, right?" So he's in the middle of davening Shemana Esrei on Shabbos, and all of a sudden he's saying Shalach Lanu. He's like, "Oh, whoops, it's Shabbos." So what does he do? They asked Rabbi Baravua. The Torah mitkri dechol b'Shabbos. The person remembers that he's davening in the middle of the the Vakatek Shemana Esrei in the middle of Shabbos. Ma u'sheik, should he finish? What should he do? So V'amar Lon, he said to them, Garment flows a bracha. You should finish the whole bracha. So the Gemara is saying, what do you mean you finished the whole bracha? You just said that if it is in a situation where somebody already davened, so he does no need to daven again, and then he remembers that when he's saying Shemana Esrei, that he had already davened, so what should he do? He should stop immediately. He shouldn't even finish the bracha. So here we're in a situation where a person's on Shabbos, and he's davening the weekday Shemana Esrei, and all of a sudden he remembers, oops, I really not supposed to be saying this. So at that stage, at that moment in time, what should he do? Presumably, he should just stop. And you're saying he should continue. He should finish the bracha. Right? That was the answer. He should at least finish the bracha. Aren't you worried about bracha latol? You're not worried. Like in the first case, you say just stop in the middle, right there. So the Gemara says, 1 second. You cannot compare these two cases and ask from one to the other. Why not? Hachi says the Gemara. Hasam gavra bar chiyuvahu. V'rabbanahu d'le'echchu mishum kvar Shabbos. In that situation of Shabbos, the person's a bar chiyuv. He has to say Shemona Esrei. Why does he have to say Shemona Esrei? Because he hasn't yet davened. He's in the middle of trying to daven. So he has a chiyuv to finish the Shemona Esrei. But he's davening the wrong tefillah. Is that the wrong tefillah to say on Shabbos? There happens to be two reasons. We're only saying over here one aspect. The aspect that we're talking about over here is not saying on Shabbos the full Shemona Esrei is because of the fact that they're abundant on Matriach. There are other reasons. For example, we're going to have of the Hillam Chav Tes about the Karles, the 7 Kos, the 7 Brachot of Shemona Esrei on Shabbos. We also learned that you're not supposed to have Bakashta on Shabbos. There's other reasons that you don't want to say a full Shemona Esrei on Shabbos. But in theory, you could say a full Shemona Esrei on Shabbos, and the person who hasn't yet davened is a bar chiyuv. So if he's in the middle of Slach Lanu, right, he's in the middle of Atachai, and he hasn't remembered that yet it's Shabbos, the first 3 brachos are the same, so such a person should finish that bracha, then switch to the Shabbos Shemona Esrei. But somebody who already davened, so he's no longer a bar chiyuva. So what are you doing still talking? It's going to be a bracha to finish talking. Stop. Over here, this person already davened. So that's the Gemara's resolution to this question. Another word from Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel. Hispal v'nichnas lebeis hakneses. Somebody who davened, and he now has come to shul. Right? He already davened. Now he's come to shul. Where did he daven? He davened at home. Wherever he was, he davened. Now he's come to shul. Umatzas shiba shemispalin, and he finds that they're up to Shemona Esrei. Meaning, we're not talking about a situation where somebody came late to davening. He already davened, and now he's in the shul, and he sees they're up to Shemona Esrei. So, if he's able to make a chiddush in something, so then yachsav yispal, then he should go back, and he should daven with them. And if he can't come up with a chiddush, if he can't come up with something new in the davening, then he shouldn't go back and daven. Says the Gemara, I need this. What does it mean? We just said a situation that a person who's coming to shul and he starts davening, and he's like, "Oops, I already davened." He should stop in the middle of the bracha. He should even stop. Why? As we said, he's not a bar chiyuv, he already davened. And now he says somebody comes to shul, sees that tzibur is being mispal, he should daven with them if he's able to mechad or something. What? What's the difference? Why in one case you say you stop, and in one case you say you should daven again? You already davened. Everyone agrees you already yetzi yechiyuv. So the key here must be in the verse of being able to mechad or something. And the Gemara wants to explain what we're talking about. Says the Gemara like this: Utricha, we need both of these cases to teach you. The Ashmin and Kamais. If I only had the first case of Shmuel, Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, where he says you come into shul and you remembered while you're davening that you already had daven. So Hani Mili Yachid, I would think that's the situation of a Yachid. That is to say, you were daven as a Yachid, and now you came to shul, and you were a situation when you had daven b'yechidas. For whatever reason, you had daven b'yechidas, and now you had forgotten that you had daven, and then you are davening now again. What is the situation when you're davening now again? Says the Morhani Mili Yachid. Right? It's a situation of Yachid v'Yachid. Oit Tzibur v'Tzibur. It's a situation where you daven initially b'yechidas, and then now you're davening again b'yechidas, and you remembered, oops, I already davened before, and so then you stop. Or it was a situation where you started out davening, we're turning the page now Chabav. You started out, your first tefillah was with a tzibur, and now you find yourself in shul, and you're davening again with a tzibur. Both of those situations, you should stop. Aval, says the Gemara, if I only had the first case of Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Aval Yochid legabe tzibur command lo yitzali dami. But I would think then that if you came into shul and you had already davened when biyichidas, and now you're davening with the tzibur, and you remember now that you had davened already before biyichidas, but now you're davening with the tzibur, you know what you should do? Continue. Why? Because your initial davening with a yachid is, it's like it's nothing compared to a Shemona Esrei with the tzibur. So therefore, you would think that you don't have to, that this halacha wouldn't apply to you, and that you should continue davening. Kamash Malam, you have to stop. Kamash Malam, you have to stop. That's what the second case is teaching you. The only time you're permitted to daven again is if you have the built-in mechad or something. if you don't have the ability to mechad or something, even if your first field was the yachid, and your second was with the tzibur, you do not continue. If we only had the second case. What's the second case? The second case meaning that there's the word of Shmuel is that you're only able to daven again if you're able to mechadesh. But I would think, you know why Shmuel says this halacha that you're not able to daven unless you're able to mechadesh something? That's because your person's walked into shul, he sees that they're davening Shmones, and he's thinking to himself, should I daven with them? And Shmuel says, well, if you can mechadesh something, then you can daven again. And if you can't mechadesh something, then do not daven. So you would think that's only because you were able to think about it ahead of time. Should I daven with them? Should I not daven with them? And you make me hold the yun. Aval hasam to ask about it, but if it was a situation where you already started davening, so then you would say maybe you should finish. So Emaloi, so tzricha, I need to have this idea of the first case of Shmuel to tell you, no, you better stop. So now it comes out that they're both needed and they're both necessary. That is to say, even if it's a situation where a person already was davening and they remembered, meaning not that they hadn't started yet, they were already davening, and then they remembered, oops, I already davened before. And they had davened before with a yachid, and now they're davening with a tzibur. The only way they're permitted to continue on going is if they can be mechad or something. If they can't be mechad or something, stop. Good? That is the various different opinions of Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. I should mention that Rashi points out, we have to go back to the Rashi here on Chav Aleph, Amud Aleph, the bottom. Rashi tells us the third Rashi from the bottom. Behag, Pasak, Halacha, Rabbi Yochanan, Besofig, Halacha, Kishmuel, Bevada, Hispal. The halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan when it comes to the suffix. In other words, if a person doesn't remember if he davened or didn't daven, so the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan. That the halacha is you would daven again if you forgot. But if it's a situation where you were vada, in other words, you know you davened, and now you remember you're at your middle of davening, and you remember, oops, I already davened. And this is not a situation, Rabbi Yochanan. You're not a suffix. You remember I already davened. You forgot maybe before you started, but now you know. So if you can mechadesh, then you can continue. If you can't mechadesh, then you stop. Doesn't make a difference if you daven now that tzibur before yachid, doesn't make any difference. And if you came into shul and you hadn't yet started Shemon Esrei, but you remember at that time, oh, you know, these guys are davening at Shemon Esrei, maybe I should daven with them. You already davened. You can still nevertheless daven with them again, l'chadchila, if you're able to mechad something. So there's no issue here. Does that sound like we're going with Rabbi Yochanan? That alvai sheispal kol hayom kulai? This is the big diyun here of the Rif, the Rabbeinu Yonah. Is Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel really arguing with each other? We don't have time to really go into it now, but just mention, maybe to mention this quickly, we'll run through a little bit of the Rif. The basic idea here is the following: that according to the way the Rif wants to learn, we are looking here on the bottom of the base on the base in the Daf Rif, and he's giving them an Aleph. So we just run through it quickly. It says as follows. Is the last two lines in Jubez and Bez. In the Daf Rif, like Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar Halavai Sheispal Kol Hayom Kulei, Halavai, a person should daven all day. And this is talking about when? By a Yachid. Ve'adaita de Rishus. And this is talking about a situation of a Yachid, and he's davening Adaita de Rishus, meaning that is permitted. Avadaita de Chayva, but to daven al das that he's mechuyev to do it again, asur. Then it's absolutely asur according to the way Rabbi Yochanan is learning, according to the Rif is paskening. It's asur to daven again mitzad chayv. In other words, Shmuel is saying that you can come in and you can continue davening. If you're able to mechadesh, you can daven. Even ideally, you can think about it and say, "Yeah, I already daven. I'm going to daven again." How are you davening? You're davening al tanadava. You want to be misnadav another tefillah to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Tefillahs we're taking mitzad the karbanos. You could do that, but not because you're required to. I mean, if you think you're required to daven again because the tzibur is davening, it's also to daven. You're not allowed to daven then. And the continues the Rif, he adds a new point. V'tzibur bein adayit to the chayv bein adayit to the rishus aser. A tzibur is not allowed to daven again. I mean, once the tzibur says, you know what, let's daven another Shemon Esrei. We're so excited. We're going to be mamish so unbelievable, thanking Hashem. We're so interested. in expressing our joy of being alive and thanking the Rebbeinu Shalom. So we want to daven again, another Shemona Esrei. Aser. A tzibur is aser, says the Rif, to daven again. Why? Because a tzibur is like the comparable to the Jewish people, and we know that tefillas connected to me and taking the more we're going to have in a few blot. Shem she'en tzibur maybe erlis nadava. A tzibur is not allowed to bling in erlis nadava. Kach and tzibur mispal tefillas nadava. So too a tzibur is not allowed to daven in tefillas nadava. Only a yochad. If a yochad mispal tefillas nadava, sheken a yochad maybe erlis nadava. Hilchach a yochad mispal tefillas musafin. Therefore, a yochad is able to daven another shachris, but a yochad is not able to be mispal tefillas musaf, which an extra tefillas musaf, because that would be a tefillas nadava. She'em is not to become musaf, because there's no nadavas for musafin. This a fundamental point that the Rif is bringing up that we didn't yet think about, which is the idea of are you davening again? Mitzad the fact that you think you are required to. If you think so, you are not allowed to daven. If you know that you're not required to daven, but you would like to daven, and again, as Shmuel points out, and you're able to do a chayda something in your davening, then you may daven. But at Tzibur, even if they all want to daven and they know there's no chiyuv, and they really can be mechadish, they have a new idea they want to be exclaiming to their Rebbeinu Shalom, they are not allowed to daven. Out to Tzibur. And then we additionally points out and says as follows that the Amar Yehuda Mashmuel Hayam V'Tfil of Niska is now we're on Gimel and Alpha and Dapi Rif. V'Niska Shekvar Spal Poisek Afil B'Emsa Bracha Mefarsh LeRabbanan Kigon Shespal Tfil Adaite Dechayva. It's a person who's thinking he has to daven Misad Chiyuv, and that's what's the Rif's edition over here. V'Shachar Shekvar Spal. You forgot that he already davened. V'Amar L'Spal Adaite Dechayva. He's davening again because he thinks there's a Chiyuv. V'Niska Shekvar Spal. So then, Poisek Afil B'Emsa Bracha needs to stop even in the middle of a bracha. Because she'in bala gaimra, because if he thinks he has to actually do it, nimtza k'mishin makim shnei tamidim mishachris. Then it's going to be like somebody who brought two tamidim for shachris, which is shu ayvim misham bal taisef. Then it's going to be literally a situation: somebody who's down in tzad and feels connected to midin, so he's going to literally be over bal taisef because you're not required to do two. Well, this is a fundamental riff. It's a massive riff and a big question on this riff. And I spoke about this on Rosh Hashanah Friday at night. Remember, we discussed the situation of Taisis, the Shita of why are you not over on Baal Taisis? If somebody wants to blow, right, extra kailas. We're blowing extra kailas in the eye of the Satan. Is that not Baal Taisis? Somebody wants to do Nanuim, right? You know, some places they do Nanuim, mamish, unbelievable. Is that Baal Taisis? If somebody wants to put in extra adasim, why is that not what weird is Baal Taisis? Why is it that if somebody wants to eat a huge amount of matzah, is that Baal Taisis? If someone wants to bring an extra carbon talmud, that's Baal Taisif? What's the difference? There's the Rif. Very clear that it would be Baal Taisif. I can't get into what it said then. You had to be there. All right, so continues the Rif, and he says, therefore you have to be Paisik, I feel Emsa Bracha, even in the middle of a bracha. Baha, I feel Rabbi Yochanan Maida. Remember I told you about, that's the Rabbi Yochanan agree with Shmuel? Here says the Rif, of course Rabbi Yochanan agrees with Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan never said that a person should daven all day ideally, which we had all of our questions on, we already mentioned before. Ella tfilas nedava, except for tfilas nedava. Rabbi Yochanan never said that a person should daven misad chiyuv or kolayim kulay. Of course not. That would be answer. The only way Rabbi Yochanan said that should kolayim kulay was only tanedava. You're going to chanunim, ben aval tfilas chayva loika amar. Unbelievable riff. Yes, very clear. Good. Continues the Gemara. Now we have another sugya and one also very relevant to Bisman Hazeh. Amar Abhuna. We are now 4 lines from the top of Chafal from Amar Abhuna Nichnas lebeis hagnesses. And what's the tzibur shem spalin? Somebody comes to the shul and he sees a tzibur that's in the middle of davening. Right? What is this case talking about? This is the case where somebody walks in and he walks in late. There, middle Shemon Esrei. We're not telling you that, and we're not castigating the guy, but that is fundamentally what happened. We're not talking about somebody already died before. We're talking about a situation where somebody comes to the shul and they are already up to Shemon Esrei. Late. That's when the person came. I always love this Gemara because the Gemara is not castigating the guy. We just say, okay, this is a halachic question now. The Musar will wait for another time. But practically, halachically, the guy walked in, it's late. What do you do? The tzibur was up to Shemon Esrei. So what do you do? Says the Gemara like this. According to Rabbi, if you're able to start davening, somehow you know, and that you can finish Shemana Esrei before the Shliach Tzibur get to Maidim, then you spell, then you should daven. But if you cannot get to finish Shemana Esrei before the Tzibur gets to Maidim, then al yispalel, then you should not daven. That is the opinion of Rabbi Huna. So you have to sort of gauge where's the Tzibur up to, If you think you could be able to finish Shemana Esrei before they get to Maidim, daven. If you don't think so, then do not. Rabbi Shimon Levi Amar, if you're able to start and finish Shemana Esrei before the tzibur gets to Kedusha, then you're spal. Then if you cannot think that you'll be able to finish Shemana Esrei before they get to Kedusha, then you should not daven. Which one gives you more time? Which one's giving you more time? No. Rav Huna is obviously giving you a lot more time because you have all until Maidim in order to be able to finish Shemana Esrei. Whereas according to the way Rabbi Shimon Levi is learning, you have to be done before you get to Kedusha. The more wants to know, what is Rabbi Shimon Levi and Rav Huna arguing about? Says the more Marsav Yachanam Kedusha, Marsav ain't Yachanam Kedusha. One man number holds that a Yachid, when he's davening Shemana Esrei, is able to say Kedusha, one holds he's not. So according to the way Rav Huna is learning, a Yachid is able to say Kedusha. So since the Yachid is able to say Kedusha, so then he doesn't have to worry about finishing before he doesn't have to worry about finishing before the tzibur gets to kedusha, because he's able to say kedusha whenever he's davening. He'll say kedusha. It's not a problem. So since the yachid is able to say kedusha, then what's the problem with maidim? Why does it have to be finished before the tzibur gets to maidim? So as Rashi explains, sure he's going to say maidim, but if he says maidim in a different place when the tzibur is not saying maidim, right? The tzibur is saying maidim, but he's not saying maidim, then what's it going to look like? It's going to look like he's bowing down to different powers than they're bowing down to. So because that looks bad, so then we want to make sure that he's done before the Shliach Tzibur gets to Maidim. We're not worried about Kedusha, because the Kedusha he could say Kedusha on his own. Where Rabbi Shimon says, whoa, you can't say Kedusha on your own. What are you talking about? Umar Sover ain't Yachanam Kedusha. You can't say Kedusha on your own. What do you mean, say Kedusha on your own? You can only say Kedusha with a Tzibur. So if you only say Kedusha with a Tzibur, so then when he's in the middle of Davening Shemana Esrei, when he gets to Kedusha, he will not be able to say it, and you have to be able to say Kedusha. So then you have to make sure that you be finished davening before the Shliach Tzibur gets to Kedusha. Good? That is the Machlokes between Rav Huna and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Now, we have to see a few things. First of all, maybe we should just finish the Gemara quickly over here. It says the Gemara, "V'chein amar Rav Ada bar Abba, minan she'en yachanam kedusha." How do you know that a yachid is not able to say kedusha? Shene'emar, the pasuk tells us, "V'nikdashti b'seich b'nei Yisrael," and I should become sanctified. I should become kadosh among the Jewish people. That called davar shebekdusha lo yehei pachas me'asar. That every davar shebekdusha you shouldn't have less than a minyan for. So if you're middle of davening on your own to say kedusha, you're not a minyan. You're just one guy davening. You're not able to say kedusha. That would be the opinion of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Now, before we go further in the Gemara further explains this point, I just want to get onto this big sugya over here, which we'll first start out with the Rif, and then we'll go to Taisus. So the Rif, again, the Dabir Rif on your Gimel Amud Beis. The Rif here says as follows: Kasav Rabbeinu Haigain. I'm doing it in the Rif because the Rabbeinu Chananel brings it down just to the Shmei Gainim, so you don't feel it with the same juice like you feel it in the Rif. The Rif says that we get this from Rabbi Haigain, and everybody knows this. Right? It was decided 1,000 years ago. Says the Rabbeinu Haigain. The minhag of the Rabbanan. This is the minhag of the rabbis. Not the rabbis, of course, they didn't come late, but the minhag of the rabbis that they tell people who come late to shul, if somebody comes to shul and he finds that tzibur is in the middle of davening, there's quiet Shemana Esrei, they should wait till the tzibur finishes. And when the tzibur starts to daven the Shemana Esrei, meaning when they start the Chazar Sashat, this tells us that they used to daven Chazar Sashat, which itself is a big topic. Can't get into more than that now. The kapaz when the tzibur starts to daven the Chazar Sashat, Mas Hashem Savasei Tiftach, and he's the Yachid who should now start saying Hashem Savasei Tiftach. The Omer Ba'ad the Shlich of the Tzibur Milsa B'Lakash, and he should say with the Shlich Tzibur each word of the Shemana Esrei. The Ani Kedusha B'Had Tzibur, and he should say Kedusha with the Tzibur. V'shaper dam levenach, and this is the correct approach. The less bav saka, because this is not a hefsek. And this, the whole point of the Gemara. The Gemara said, if you're able to finish Shemana Esrei before you get the Kedusha with Rabbi Shua ben Levi, that's only hechad the maskal mekam shliach tzibur. That's only if you start davening before the shliach tzibur. Avokad maskal b'had shliach tzibur shaper dam. But if you start davening with the shliach tzibur, then it's not a problem at all. So we're qualifying where Rabbi Shua ben Levi says that you are not able to start davening unless you're able to finish Kedusha before the Shliach Tzibur. That's only a situation where you have come into shul and you're now trying to make a deal. Should I start davening Shemana Esrei or not? But assuming you have waited till the Shliach, let's assume you couldn't daven fast enough. So now you're going to daven with the Shliach Tzibur. Obviously, so much Shliach Tzibur they're able to daven alongside with. But the Shliach Tzibur you're able to keep up with. So then you daven each word with the Shliach Tzibur. When they get to Kedusha, they get the money, they get to anything. You do it with them, no problem at all. That's not a situation of any sort of a hefsek. There's no question. Even Rabbi Shimon Levi would agree to that. Everybody agrees to that. Good? That's the riff. The Rabbi Nachman brings it down from Shem the Gainim, and now we have Taisus. Taisus here, we also have to remember Taisus we already did on Yud Gimel on Beis, right? Taisus told us already in Yud Gimel on Beis about Rabbeinu Tam. Remember the Taisus? Taisus in Shoyel. On Yud Gimel on Beis, Taisus had told us as follows. Taisus said, Rabbeinu Tam hayaragel shayamam tim oisapel. Rabbeinu Tam would come to shul and he would wait by Micha Maicha kidei la'anis kedusha, right? Kaddish with that He would wait. He wouldn't damage Messi until he finished. What does it mean? Where's Rabbeinu Tam coming? Did he come on? I don't even understand what that means. But okay, he was there. He was waiting for the Shliach Tzibur to finish. And then, so you could say Kedusha with the Shliach Tzibur, right? Because remember, right, once you hit Gal Yisrael, you can't be Mafsik at all. This would be Emtzepek. And what do you mean Emtzepek? How are you able to stop? Because we already pointed out that in the same way, there's no bigger show than the Ayira, or Meshib Ayira from the Rebbeinu Shalom. So for Kedusha and Kaddish, you'll be able to say that. That's not a problem, even if it's Emtzepek. But not between Gal Yisrael and Shemon Esrei, that you wouldn't be able to do. So he would wait over there. And that was his approach. That was his custom. And additionally, Taisa said as well, that Misha Mispal Levadim Shliach Tzibur Magil Maidim. One has the Shliach Tzibur got to Maidim when you're in the middle of davening, right? Meaning you daven a long davening, and now the Shliach Tzibur is at Maidim. So Yishchal Maidim, you should bow down, but Avaloi Yaimar Maidim, but don't say Maidim, right? The Shliach Tzibur is up to Maidim, you're not up to Maidim, just bow down with them. But it's only if you're in the middle of a bracha, because you don't want to be Persian to see Tzibur. You don't want everybody to think that maybe you bow down to other things. They bowing, you're not bowing to God, like we said here about the concern from Rav Huna, what Rashi said over here on Chav Aleph from a base. And then Taisa said as well, but if you're at the end of a bracha, then you shouldn't be bowing down, because later on we're going to have the Gemara says in Lamed Daled that at the end of a bracha, if you bow down, it is mashal you being bowing down for the bracha, and you're not allowed to do that. Again, Kahan and Beis Hamikdash will be exceptions. We'll see. This Taisvus here, Chav Aleph and Beis, is a connection to that Gemara. Says Taisvus, look here in the middle of the narrow lines, the top there on the narrow lines. Rabbeinu Tam was accustomed when he would daven on his own. Remember, we just saw that Rabbeinu Tam and Yigimel Beis, the same idea. When he would be davening on his own, I mean not on his own in his house, he's davening on his own in the shul. Why was he on his own in the shul? We don't know. We just saw when the Chazan get to Maidim, he would bow with everybody, but he wouldn't say anything. But only in the middle of a bracha, I would say bracha loy. But in the end of the bracha, no. Why? Again, because of the issue we just saw about the Gemara Lamed Daled. Additionally, the Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri. If you go further down in the narrow lines, the further down the narrow lines of Rabbeinu Tam, the Ri hayu the Adrab Shem Ishemei Kain Havi Afsaka. So this idea is based upon what we've already seen before. Is Shemei Kaina or not? If Shemei Kaina is like you're actually saying something, then there have been a time of the Rebbe made it like a sort of like a, not a joke, but they sort of like said, if Shemei is Kaina and you're listening, so isn't that going to be a hefsek? If Shemei is Kaina, then it should be a hefsek, then you're like stopping to say it. I mean, you're not supposed to be doing that. So, nevertheless, the minig is that we do stop when the Tzibur saying Kedusha, etc. We do stop. We don't say it with them if we're not up to that in Shemon Esrei, but we stop, and that's not considered. And we sort of yetsa just with thinking. Without saying it, and that's not considered a hefsek. Okay, we don't have time to see the rest of the Taisvus, but it's all juicy stuff and a lot to see there. I just want to mention the next Taisvus on the bottom of Ein Yacham Espal Kedusha. This Taisvus doesn't bring that from the Gaon, it doesn't bring that from a Haigan like the Rach. It brings that from the Gaon, but the Rif said the from a Haigan. So Taisvus here in the Ein Yacham Espal brings down this idea of the fact that if you are davening with your Shliach Tzibur, Shemon Esrei is davening. You're davening. You're quiet Shemon Esrei with the Shliach Tzibur. When the Shliach Tzibur gets to Kedusha, you stay with the Shliach Tzibur and the Kadesh and the whole Kedusha, and that's not an issue at all. That's not a problem. That's not considered a yachid, right? Because we had an issue. Is that considered yichidus? Would Rabbi Shimon Levi prevent that? It says that's yichidus. You're davening on your own. You're not davening with the Shliach Tzibur because you're davening your private Shemon Esrei. No. Since you're davening in the middle with the Shliach Tzibur, that's not considered a yachid. 100% you're able to say Kedusha, Maidim, etc. with the Tzibur. It's not an issue at all. This idea that you're not supposed to say Kedusha unless you have a tzibur, the Gemara is saying from Bishub and Levi, they learned that from the pasuk of an Igdashti B'Seich B'nei Yisrael. That called that all things that have Kedusha are not supposed to be less than 10. So the Gemara said, what's the mashmayas that you need to have 10? So now we're back to the Gemara. And we have here a vart on the parsha. Happens to be it's we haven't been able to do that recently because of the fact that it's been not enough time. These are quite long Gemara. I put Here, okay. So we'll see it inside. Says the Gemara as follows. So we're up to here, about a third of the way. Devin Nash says the Gemara, my mash, what's the mashmois? That Davar Shebekdusha requires you to have that requires you to have 10. What is the source of that? Says the Gemara, my mashma the Tani Rav Noi Achvad Rabbi Chia Bar Abba Asya Teich Teich. We learn out of Gzer Shav of Teich Teich. What is the Gzer Shav? Ksiv Hachav Nikdash to B'Seich B'nei Yisrael. It says over here, and I should be sanctified amongst the B'nei Yisrael. Uksiv Hasam. We have a pasuk in Midbar by Kairach. It says the Badlu Mitoicha Eido Hazais. I should be separated out from this Eido. Ma'ala Halon Asar Afkan Asar. Just like by Kairach was Asar, so to here it's Asar. That's not very clear because it wasn't Asar by Kairach. Kairach had his little merry band of 250 people. So what are we talking about? You have to look there on the Maseres Hashas. Maseres Hashas brings down the Gemara in Megillah, and the Gemara says over there, look at the Maseres Hashas. V'asya, Torah Chlam, you have to add in these words. Eda dechsiv ad masay lo eda hara azais. Just like about the Meraglim, where we talked about the Eda, and that was 10, right? Because there were 2 Meraglim that were okay, right? Yeshua and Kalev. So the Eda that was bad, ad masay lo eda hara azais. Was reference to the other Meraglim who were 10, and over here by Kairach we say and that's therefore also going to be a reference to the 10. And since we have B'Tzoich, we have an example of Sech Ben Israel, and by Kairach it says so therefore we see with that the fact that a Davar Shebekdusha requires 10 because V'Nikdashti B'Tzoich and the Toich and Eda. That gets you to the idea that all Davar Shebekdusha needs 10. So if you shouldn't say Kedusha just alone. This is the idea of Rabbi Shimon Levi. Now, this you might have noticed that this is somewhat tortured. If you look at the Yerushalmi, not here in the third paragraph, but in the seventh paragraph of Brachos, the Yerushalmi gives a few reasons as to how you know that Davar Shebekdusha requires 10. And one of the reasons of the Yerushalmi is from a pasuk in our parsha. The pasuk tells us that the Jewish people came. They came down to get provisions. This week's parsha. But it says b'nei Yisrael, right? So it uses the word b'nei Yisrael and uses the word b'soich haboim. And over here, what do we have in our pasuk? V'nikdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. So the Yerushalmi wants to learn out that we know that a Davar Shebekdusha needs 10, not from Kairach, not from the Meraglim, but from the Bnei Yisrael, the Achei Yosef. Yes, they did a little bit of an issue with selling Yosef for sure. But nevertheless, when it came to the brothers themselves, were otherwise big tzaddikim. So says Rabbeinu Bachya, Parashat Emor at the end. Says Rabbeinu Bachya, the Akshav Yavi Raya Me'asar Achei Yosef Shayu Tzaddikim L'Davar Shebekdusha. We should bring a Raya better from them to learn out that we need a minion when it comes to Davar Shebekdusha than to learn it out from the Oisvarvs that were Kairach and his merry band or the Meraglim. So Kiddush the Gemara. Udekule Alma says the Gemara. Udekule Alma mias mifsak loy pasek. Nevertheless, everybody agrees that you're not supposed to be mafsek. This would be going according to Rabbi Shua ben Levi or Rav Huna. Everybody agrees you're not supposed to be mafsek. Your tefillah for Kedusha, meaning if you're in the middle of V'lam al Shinim, you don't say Kedusha. The only heta we saw from Rav Hai Gaon is if you're saying it word for word with the Shliach Tzibur, then you're able to say Kedusha. That's not an issue. That would not be considered by Yacha. That's considered doing it with the Tzibur. Finish the Gemara. Again, remember the lesson we had on Gimel Amud Aleph. We also over there and Gimel Amud Aleph. Remember the line that we had. And this slide where Marsha wanted to put in, it should be Yehei Shemai Hagadol Mavarach. In any event, however it is, says the Gemara over here that what about Yehei Shmei Rabbah? Do you, and maybe that's why Marsha got it, because over here you see it says Yehei Shemai, it doesn't say Yehei Shmei, right? So that the name of Hashem should be great. Shafilu Oisik B'Maisim Merkava Paisik, that the limit that we wanted to say was that you're not able to be mafsik. Except for Yehei Shmei Rabbah, there you're able to be mafsik, and we say no, that's not true. Shafilu Oisik B'Maisim Merkava, you're able to be mafsik, but less Hilchos HaKava say, and the halacha is not like that. In other words, the halacha we paskin that you're not able to be mafsik even for Yehei Shmei Rabbah. Even for Yehei Shmei Rabbah, you're not able to be mafsik. Okay, then is the Gemara. So we'll go through them relatively quickly over here. Rabbi Yehuda says that you do make a bracha before and after. Does that mean to say that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold the tefillas Ezra? That he says that Balkari is able to do Torah, is able to study. But how do we know that Rabbi Shimon Levi says that Balkari is also to do Divrei Torah? That a person is going to inform his children. And we're going to teach him about the day that we stood outside. And just like over there, a Balkari is Asr, so too over here, Balkari is Asr. What do you mean, just like over there, Balkari is Asr? Just like by my entire Balkari is Asr. This is what Rashi brought down yesterday. Just like a Balkari is Asr by Mantera, and that's why a person has to be Al Shalisha for 3 days, even though, as we pointed out in the Ritva, for sure would nevertheless still Balkari, nevertheless, at least ideally, a Balkari is Asr. So too, teaching your children about the Man Torah, which would be by definition teaching them about Torah, that would be Asr, and therefore, since that would be Asr, the halacha would be that a Baal carries Tzarech Tefillah. So therefore, that's a question of Rabbi Yehuda. So it says the Gemara, V'chitam Rabbi Yehuda loy dar smuchim. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold the smuchim. Right? We remember we already had smuchim. The Gemara told us about smuchim where on Yud and Aleph. The Gemara told us about smuchim la'adul olmim. Right? We learned out that there are smuchim in Torah. Nevertheless, it's the machlekes whether or not we do darshan smuchim or not, and we say it as follows. So maybe you're going to say that we don't want to darshan smuchim. Even people who don't darshan smuchim generally, they do darshan smuchim when it comes to dvarim. In Mishnah Torah, everyone darshan smuchim. Rabbi Yehuda loy dar smuchim b'chol Torah. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't darshan smuchim in the rest of the Torah, but with Mishnah Torah darsh. But in the rest of the Torah, he is darshan smuchim. How do we know? How do we know that Rabbi Yehuda is not darshan smuchim in the rest of the Torah? The Tanya. Because we have a brayso that says, you cannot let a mechshefa to live, and a person who is acting inappropriately with animals is going to die. Some in Yanim are samich to each other. To teach you just like somebody who is shechem v'hem gets a skila, so therefore, we learn from Smuchim to teach you that you get skila. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda v'chim nesha samcha in your noitz skila, because there's saimach machshefa and somebody who's sheichem and behema, they're going to give skila, which is the most chomertik mesa. You can't do that. Rather, how do you know that machshefa gets skila? Rather, oiv yadayin, which is a type of kishuv. There, the pasuk is very clear that you get skila. Just like oiv yadayin, which is a type of kishuv. That gets skila. And Torah is very clear that gets skila. So the mechashefa also gets skila. So therefore, it comes out of contrary Yehuda that he does not hold of smuchim. However, even if he doesn't hold of smuchim, Mishnah Torah, he nevertheless does hold of smuchim. Says the more Mishnah Torah, minon the darsh. How do you know about Mishnah Torah that he does hold of smuchim? The Tanner Blazer Omer, noisy adam anusasav and fudasav. A person able to marry somebody who was ma'anis by the father, or somebody who was mafata by the father, or anusas ben fudas benai. Rabbi Yehuda oiser anusasav and fudasav. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he holds that somebody who was ma'anis by the father, by his own father, or was mafata by his own father, he's not able to marry such a person. But Amar of Gidal Marav, my time is Rabbi Yehuda. What is the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? The chsiv lo yikach eshes aviv. Yehuda holds that the reason he's not able to do it is because the person is not able to be megal the kanaf of his father, kanaf shara aviv lo yigala. A kanaf that his father saw, he's not able to be megal. Therefore, he's not able to marry such a person. Amri says so the Gemara says, "We might have anusas aviv." Ksiv, how do you know that that's by the anusas aviv? If you look in there in Parashki Seitzei, the pasuk right before is talking about anusas aviv and mefudas aviv. I'm sorry, the pasuk right before is talking about an einus mafata. So we learn out from that, and right after that says about the idea of lo yigal kanaf aviv. So we learn out that that's talking about also about the situation of anusas aviv and mefudas aviv, and therefore you see that Rabbi Yehuda is darshaning smuchen in Mishnah Torah, even though he's not darshaning smuchen in the rest of the Torah, and therefore for all practical intents and purposes, Amri and Mishnah Torah darsh, he does hold of Mishnah smuchen in Mishnah Torah. So therefore, it's now going to come out that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we asked the question, why is Rabbi Yehuda saying that he doesn't hold the tefillas Ezra? He's he's allowing a Baal Keri to learn in Torah. Doesn't he hold the smuchen? Rabbi Shimon Levi is talking about smuchen. Rabbi Shimon Levi is talking about smuchen in Mishnah Torah. So why is he not holding that? That's what we're going to have to deal with next week in Mirta Hashem. Have a wonderful day. Good Shabbos.